Way to tee me up there. Okay, thank you, Dr. Johnson. Good evening. My name is Reverend Krisha Arvin. I'm trying to stash my little folder here. Here we go. I'm a board certified chaplain, a specialist in palliative care and hospice, an ACPE certified educator, manager of clinical pastoral education at Norton Healthcare. I get my hands dirty in a lot of these kinds of situations, vicariously through students and personally myself. I'm honored to have been asked to be here to speak this evening. So, faced by the limits, spiritual struggle and resources amidst medical finitude. You brought it right on into the room. So the title, I think, sounds about as scary as some of these examples that Dr. Johnson was raising, and just about as grim. My hope is that even though I don't have the answers, like spoiler alert, this is not, you're not going to hear answers to these impossible choices by the end of this talk. That's not what this is. But I want to move us closer toward the not being forever undone by this, that part that Dr. Oliver mentioned. That's my hope for the conversation. So, as you've already heard, discussions of ethics are inevitable when matters of humanity are laid before us. Let's get a little reminder, a little refresher, if you will, on what Dr. Johnson was just explaining to us. Basically, ethics examines the rational justification for our moral judgments. It offers guidance into what is morally right or wrong, just or unjust. In impossible choices, such as those that you've heard this evening, babies born with debilitating and life-limiting illness, unclear decision-making authority, imaginary trolleys, and life lost no matter the decision made. What is the determining factor that helps us to know what is right, what is wrong, what is the just thing to do? Of the many different kinds of contributing factors, often a person's spirituality plays a key role in influencing their views of what is right, what is wrong, and what's even acceptable. Years ago, I came across a fantastic definition of spirituality, and I use it even to this day. When I'm educating chaplains or nurses or med students, social workers, you name it, I pull this thing out. Interestingly, I found this definition in a report published by the Association of American Medical Colleges. It struck me as one of the most inclusive and therefore eye-opening ways to help learners begin to comprehend the difference between religious and spiritual. And there's quite a difference. It reads, spirituality is recognized as a factor that contributes to health in many persons. The concept of spirituality is found in all cultures and societies. And here's where it gets good. It is expressed in an individual's search for ultimate meaning through participation in religion and or belief in God, family, naturalism, rationalism, humanism, and the arts. All of that. All these factors can influence how patients and healthcare professionals perceive health and illness and how they interact with one another. When we're in the midst of the toughest, literally life or death decisions we may ever make, we are most certainly engaging matters of ultimate meaning. Many people look to their spirituality for insights, for strength, to help make meaning of their circumstances and to help them better perceive and understand the next right step to take. While serving in palliative care, I found myself involved in quite a number of cases wherein there were no clear-cut, easy choices, for a family member, staff person, for the patient to make. Sitting with the medical teams during the pre-meeting huddle, and that's the pre-meeting meeting. That's when all the medical team, everyone who's gonna come and offer information to the family, they gather together and we get our stories together. What are the options? What are the issues? What is at stake here? What can we say? What do we already preemptively expect the family to object to? Do we have a response to that? How can we address this and the other? What are some of the concerns that are already known before we sit down with the family to present this picture? In those pre-meetings, I have heard the teams weigh in, offering what they believe is medically indicated, evidence-based next steps for the plan of care. And in other words, the most logical medical options forward. I would hear the often very limited medical possibilities that could offer the patient some modicum of the life they once had or desire. In many of these pre-meetings, I became aware of the hard line medical science has to draw at the threshold of doing harm, thereby further limiting the medical interventions that could be offered in that particular case. And in the saddest of cases, no medical option existed at all that could forestall the inevitable loss of life. The desired outcome of the meeting with the family is to determine a plan of care for the patient. But as we know, the plan is driven by the goal. Plans of care come into being when there's a goal of care that's clear enough to understand, and the team and the family work together to move toward that goal by creating a plan of care. Who determines the goal of care? Where does that even come from? Typically, that first comes from the family. And if that patient has already indicated what they want prior to any terrible situation befalling them, like an advance directive, if they have something in writing, that's where one would turn first to discern what the goals would be for this individual in this situation. So in the context of the most impossible decisions you can imagine, let's shift our focus for a moment to those who determine the goals of care. What tend to be the goals or the goal that a family is hoping for? And it's not as if there's always one, but there tends to always be hope. So let's start there. A miracle, total recovery. And sometimes by miracle, a family might actually mean, little small miracles along the way, little bits along the way toward a bigger one. And you got to really get into a conversation to understand what miracle means to a person. Reasonable recovery. This is enough. Will they be able to at least walk again? Can they sit up? Can they feed themselves? Will they be on the ventilator? Will it be a trach? Small things to understand and determine for themselves, decide what is enough. This is reasonable. Some people want a peaceful death for their loved one, for themselves. And they're clear, and that's their hope. They see an end that is imminent, and they desire that to be peaceful. Some hope for a little more time. Just a little more time. Can you keep them connected to these machines? Can you keep doing these things? Can you continue to pump another bag of this, that, titrate this and the other? Because so-and-so is coming back from Iraq. We've got Red Cross involved. They're trying to get them over here. How much more time can you give us? A second opinion. I don't really believe that this is the case here. This is too complex for this podunk hospital. I want to find the best. I want to go to Cleveland Clinic. I want to go to the Mayo Clinic. I want to go where the president goes. I want to get a second opinion. I want someone else smarter than you to tell me what's really going on here. or I just want a different outcome altogether. Let it just be something different than the end that seems imminent. Hope. Spiritual struggle enters the scenario when hope and fear collide. Hope for the best, fear of the worst. In the midst of impossible choices, we are humans. We are humans, bracing ourselves against an awful and uncontrollable circumstance. Those of us who have cared for families in these situations, or have been there ourselves, have seen the sweating on the brows, maybe under the armpit, just drenched, of the loved ones hovering over the bedside, the fear in their eyes, shaky voices, tears, trembling, cold, clammy hands, disoriented behavior, disorganized thinking, nervousness, anger, and sometimes even a stoic, seemingly disconnected affect, as though they just checked out. Does this list of observations sound familiar to you? What you've just heard and have likely either observed or experienced for yourself are common reactions to trauma. Many studies show the impact of traumatic experiences on human affect, on our way of being. This list that you see is among those that I have come across in my research of the impacts of trauma. You see exhaustion, confusion, sadness, anxiety, agitation, numbness, dissociation, confusion, physical arousal, like just getting amped up, blunted affect. The spiritual endeavor of having to hold hope and fear within the same heart lands upon us regular human beings very much like a traumatic event. When faced with the limits of what medical science can do, the actual finitude of it all, families are often left with the unthinkable option of basically choose your trauma. Which one of these options is the least awful of the awful things I must choose? Which one of these is least likely to traumatize me the worst? Which moral distress can I live with? And these are horrible questions, but they're real and they're happening in every ICU every day. Although I do not profess to have the right answer for an impossible choice, we have learned quite a bit about how to engage trauma. What you see on the screen at this time is the list of 6 principles of trauma-informed care. This study, published in October of 2020, came along at a time when families and medical science were facing the brand new limits of their understanding of COVID-19. Medical personnel having to make tough choices in the midst of limited PPE, ventilator resources are scarce, personnel not wanting to go onto units that had COVID, people quitting, people committing suicide, family members having to contend with the sudden lockdown on visitation and being forced to view their loved ones' final moments of life remotely at a cold and very unfamiliar distance. Everyone was impacted by the pandemic event. A few escaped some level of traumatic exposure to the realities of what at times felt like the most impossible of all situations we had faced in recent years. In an effort to offer care to patients, families, and personnel in the midst of or who have experienced trauma, these 6 principles must be established and upheld. As you see on the screen: safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural issues. One thing I want to reiterate is that impossible choices do not occur within a vacuum. You can't make that choice in a vacuum. Everyone, every single person involved is on some level affected by the situation and its complexity. Engaging spiritual resources. So, as we dive a little deeper into engaging trauma-informed spiritual resources, the question is, how do we help? How do we help? Not solve, but how do we help? What can we do as professionals standing outside the situation we see unfolding right in front of us? What can we do for each other as professionals, having to bear witness to that which may cause us tremendous moral or spiritual distress? Using the 6 principles of trauma-informed care as a model for how to engage spiritual resources, let's take a few moments to unpack each principle, starting with these 2. Safety, cultural issues. I partnered them together because I think one enables the other. It's you can't really get one to talk about the sensitivity of cultural issues or their concerns about that if they don't feel safe. And somehow feeling safe is made more possible when you're willing to talk about the elephants in the room, which might be cultural issues. So they are partners in creating the space and the atmosphere for this kind of care to proceed. With regard to cultural issues, remember that definition that I showed you before with spirituality? It was big and it's robust and really inclusive. Well, what you're looking for from a spiritual care perspective would be their values. What their values are at stake in that moment. There's something that has pressed upon something they hold so deeply. If it weren't so, this wouldn't really be a tough decision. We're not talking about whether or not I'm going to pay the parking meter or risk it or different things. I don't recommend that, but just different things like that, less serious kinds of choices to make. We're talking about something that's at the core of who this person is and what they hold dear and deeply believe. You're also going to touch on fears. That's a part of that question as well. When you're establishing a safe space, you're creating a place where those fears can be named, where your fears can be named. We'll get to your part here in a second. Trustworthiness and transparency. When feeling helpless and vulnerable, as most would in some of these impossible choices, trust is imperative, but it might be hard to earn. It's difficult to extend trust in many situations, and compound that with choices that you're not certain about. If you have doubts on who's offering it, what the motives are you just trying to kill that one healthy person and get these organs out of here to save all these other people? Am I too poor for you? Do I not have good insurance? All of the kinds of worries and doubts that really hinder an individual's ability and add to the level of angst and fear of an impossible choice to begin with. All of those things need to be laid bare. They need space to come out and be addressed. And so as you are dealing with someone who is traumatized by the impact of all of this, the decision itself, where it's happening, how many people are talking to them, how often they keep calling, there's voicemails, there's family trying to get updates. All of this is compounding the entire situation. Therefore, transparency. Honesty about the situation and the limitations, that's part of our role in offering care and help to people who are going through this kind of trauma. Consistency in the messages that we're conveying. Consistency in what we're saying to our families and to the loved ones that are arriving. goes a long way toward building and sustaining the trust needed to care for someone in the midst of a traumatic event. Peer support. Remember, when these 6 principles were published, the hope was that these principles can be used to help our patients and families, but also each other. We're working hand in hand, arm in arm, doing this work every day, and it's hard. Peer support. Assessing the network of strength and support that exists for that individual is a part of a spiritual assessment as well, but it falls in everybody's wheelhouse. They don't have you after this incident is done. That would be unprofessional and inappropriate. That's crossing boundaries. They have you for now. Whom else do they have in their lives? What other resources might be available to come alongside? Medical personnel to family member, coworker to coworker. Are you willing to stand in that gap for a time? That brings us to, this one is probably my, if I can have a favorite, I guess, of this kind of thing, but this one stirs me the most, I should say. Collaboration and mutuality. So the humility of the situation is also the humanity of it. And what I mean is, there's something supremely humbling about acknowledging one's own limitations. We are not God. Just, and period, end of story. The finite nature of life and the finitude of medical science, that's a big one to swallow. When coming into a situation, perhaps one has had quite a bit of faith in everything that a place like this can do. And to be faced with the limits that they can't do the miraculous, the scientifically miraculous, doesn't exist in the situation, that's hard. There's only so much we know to do, to cure, to correct, to restore. That humble awareness is the humanity of the situation. The same reality that any human being in that situation would face. Levels the playing field. The degree to which we allow ourselves to feel that, to feel the depth of that humility, is in direct relationship to our ability to take part in what I would call collaborative grief. You got to let yourself feel that. The farther away you distance yourself and withdraw, armor yourself against feeling how horrible that is for those people over there, the less likely you are to be empathetically connected to what they're experiencing. You cannot partner a person that you are not willing to be empathetic toward. Doesn't happen. So what am I suggesting? Do we open ourselves up to feel even more of the burden and distress of the situation? What I'm saying is that partnering with patients, families, and other staff in the collaborative nature truly does require a deeper level of intimacy and empathy. Feeling with that person or family in order to engage in the mutuality of that human experience. When I'm educating students, I define mutuality as respect, empathy, and grace. Those 3 things, respect, empathy, and grace, absolutely necessary. Got to have all 3 in order for there to be a moment of mutuality. When it's one-sided, it's hospitality. When it's shared, it's mutuality. Respect, empathy, and grace. The final portion of the number 6 of this principle, empowerment, voice, and choice. You are a resource. You, the human being, intersecting the mortality of another human being. You are very well equipped. You are a very well-equipped resource from which to draw the first few insights on how to engage someone having a spiritual struggle. And empathy is the key to unlocking that resource. Again, you're not going to unlock the resource if you don't want to feel what's happening, if you don't want to engage what's going on. Thank you. Using your skills and the gift of empathy, you know how to draw from your own lived experience of pain and even from the collaborative grief of the experience happening in that moment to empower the family or colleague with access to answers, those things that can be answered, that may help them make that tough decision. You know how to amplify their voice by coming alongside them and lifting their concerns for consideration rather than pressing further to the swiftest end of the angst in the situation. Make it end, please. When you call on your chaplains, we are resources. Call on your chaplains in these events. What you have there is an individual who, although we cannot make the decision for the person involved, you have someone trained in offering themselves as a spiritual resource, drawing strength and courage from God or higher power, even each other. We wade into these deep, dark waters, coming alongside those in the midst of the impossible. Some of the spiritual support we offer can take the form of openly acknowledging that this is awful. Elephant in the room. This is awful. And in many cases, nothing can make it less so. We come in seeking to acknowledge the depth of all that is at stake for this person in the moment. We try to create space to grieve together, as this is truly a grievous decision felt by many. We come in acknowledging our finitude and that of the medical science, bravely allowing space for the unspeakable to be spoken. You can say it, for the words to wash over us and them. We come in acknowledging the difficulty of the seeming futility of holding on to hope at a time like this. We come in offering grace in advance of the forgiveness that they might also be seeking. We come in engaging the nuances of what is hoped for. What do you feel able to hope for, we say. And though we don't have the answers and feel some measure of the immense distress of this impossible choice, we step closer to the pain. And in so doing, we are asking, may I hold that hope with you? Thank you. Space for questions. Yes, ma'am.
I liked what you said about transparency and trustworthiness. And it occurs to me that, sometimes it's hard for caregivers and providers to be very direct about what dire prognosis is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder how much do you still hold hope in a conversation with a family? And yet how much do you paint a picture of we've now done everything we can do?
I think that's a great question. That's when the exploration of what is being hoped for is really crucial. I think that's an invitation to sit with that family and explore at a deeper level what the goals are and get into what is valued by the patient. Let's let the patient speak if they, through the voices of those present. And what is the fear? The fear helps us get at what the real hope is and engage what's really happening. And I think truth telling is always important, even when it's hard. Any other questions?
Oh, sorry. No.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, okay. I liked how you talked about spiritual struggle as hope and fear as a collide. I love that image versus hope held in tension with fear. It just seems messier and probably truer to the reality of what's happening I wonder if you could talk more about that. You know, how'd you come to that? I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. I just got the 1 minute signed. Thank you, thank you. Oh, okay, excellent. I'm open to that question. I think that's excellent. It would have come from bold questioning is really where I got that. When in some of those situations that I'm referencing of sitting with families and sitting with medical teams and those things, having been bold enough to ask specifically what the fear is, puts it out there. And then I'm seeing that it's almost an anathemism. I got that word all wrong. But anyway, it's like a sin, in other words, to say, I'm afraid of this and I have this hope. So putting them on the table allows me to hold the tension while it collides for them. I'm sort of standing in that gap in that moment and able to hold the things that they can't hold, but they're being held in the room anyhow. And we're still discussing the realness of that fear.
Conversation.
Good stuff. CPE.
Take that other question. As a keeper of time, go ahead and.
Right. Thank you. So
Did you have a question? I thought I saw one more
I
question.
thought I did see one more hand.
Tiny one, but
Yes.
not nearly as deep as that.
Oh, no.
Well, I was just thinking about empathy and I worry about how being present for someone through empathy could lead to burnout.
Mm-hmm.
But then maybe it depends, like maybe sometimes really leaning into it actually reduces that burnout. And I don't know, and I don't know if I'm even asking the right kind of question. So can you help unpack that a little bit?
Yes, and where I thought you were headed was secondary trauma.
Right.
You know, but everyone in the situation is being firsthand traumatized by it, but just to varying degrees because of their closeness or engagement to it. So to your question about burnout, that is a risk. If the individuals such as us, if we're allowing that much of it to touch us, it is imperative that we have a self-care plan that can offset that. If you're not someone that actually attends to your own spiritual well-being, your mental health, your physical wellness, you might want to start that first before diving deeply into empathy because it will wipe you out. You're allowing yourself to feel continually, repeatedly, touch these really rough situations. It's happening just once for that family, but a lot of times for you, because you got 5 families on your unit where this is happening. So this is a big ask. To have empathy and open yourself, that's a huge ask. That does not come without a cost. There's an immense cost to you. So on the other side of things, you have to attend to your own needs. You have to know your limitations. You have to be able to partner with someone and step away when it's too much. No one's asking you to be a martyr. That's poor care. Thank you. One last thing.